Thanks for coming. This is kind of new to a lot of people in St. Louis. I mean, there's a lot of the larger companies that are doing them already. You guys do them already. And we're, VSR does some, I know, but Toro purchased VSI. So VSI is definitely the leader in liquid applications and line makers and everything. And Adam Hansen's here today to talk. He's been with VSI since the start.
Yep, from the beginning.
And they're out of Michigan?
Minnesota.
Or Minnesota, okay, sorry.
One of the M states up
One of the M states up there. I just went to Minnesota bear hunting, so. So they started just with liquid. So they've been all the trials and tribulations and that, and perfecting the equipment, perfecting the brine mixes and that. And I've been, I'm just gonna say, I've been talking to a lot of people the last couple weeks since we found out we were getting this, and people say, oh, it don't work in St. Louis. And it's like, well, what are you using? Well, they say they don't need additives in St. Louis. Adam's gonna tell you why you do need additives in St. Louis because of the way our conditions are. And so, it's an opportunity to save salt. It's an opportunity to save the environment. It's an opportunity to make more money, an opportunity to do a better job. If your lots are clean and others people's lots aren't clean because you're using liquid, it's a big difference. So anyway, questions pop up, just ask, and I really appreciate you coming. It's all a learning experience. It's a learning experience for us too, honestly. I've been trying to get VSI for like 3 years, and they were in negotiations with Toro, and they couldn't do it. So, but anyway, thanks for coming along. Find a seat anywhere you want to see.
I'm Rob with Boss Snow Plow. So we've got the Snow Raider, we've got our plows out there, we've got the new Snow Raider mag with our attachments. We will go over that. I don't have a PowerPoint presentation, but we'll go over that live with the machine, I think after lunch.
Yeah.
So I just want to reiterate with Adam and his company, these aren't guys just sitting behind a desk designing machinery. I mean, these guys are out in it. They've tried it all. They've got different percentage points of brine. They've tried all the additives. They've tried all the different nozzles and equipment that's out there, and they've got this literally down to a science. The equipment is state of the art, but I think the big thing that I picked up from Adam is the chemistry of that mix, especially in different markets. You guys get a lot of rain, then it freezes, and I know there's probably been some people that have used it and it's worked, and some people that haven't. Adam's going to go over the details of that chemistry, and to me that's the most important part, is getting that mix right, getting the additives right, and again, he's not just some guy behind the desk. These guys are out in the field using it. So I think that's a huge advantage. So anyways, I'll turn it to Adam.
Excellent. Well, yeah, thanks everyone for coming today. Big thank you to Scott and his team for actually putting this on. Very good turnout, very happy about that. So yeah, we're just gonna go over a lot of different things with liquid, pretty much the science behind it, additive rates, things like that, just so you can get familiar with the process and how it can actually work in your business. Before we get started, who here has used liquids before? Okay. So we got some that kind of know a little bit about it, have been doing it for a few years, and then some that haven't at all. So this is going to be great. So a little background on myself. So I was snow and ice operations manager of a commercial snow and ice management company in Minnesota. We're about an hour southwest of Minneapolis. So I did that for a few years before VSI started to grow. And I moved over to that side because one of the owners of VSI actually had a large landscape and snow operation. So when I'm telling you things, it's coming from experience. I've been the guy that was the babysitter for 25 shelters, making the call on when we're gonna go out, what blend of liquids we're gonna use, and I was also tasked with experimenting with things too, which made my life interesting at times. So we have not spread any significant granular product for 10 years. Actually, it's a little bit closer to 12. So yeah, that means we didn't own a V-Box spreader. We don't have one even on our sidewalks. Everything was 100% liquid. So with well-managed pre-treatment and post-treatment practices, we replace that completely. So in our market, we're still the only ones that do 100% liquid for de-icing. So the right blends and application rates make the difference, and that's one of the things that I hear when I talk to people. If they had experience with liquids in the past and it maybe didn't work, a lot of times I ask, what were you using? And they say, well, I got a tote of something from a guy that I know. Okay, they have no idea what it was. I say, how much did you put down per acre? They're like, I don't know, I just made a PVC boom, opened the valve, and just let it gravity feed out. So they could have been not putting down enough product, putting down too much product, or not even the right product to begin with. So that's what we're here to help you out with. So at this point, we've worked with over 250 contractors throughout the US and Canada to actually achieve liquids in their business, and a lot of them have gone to 100% liquid, you know, over the course of a couple of years, just kind of learning the process, becoming comfortable with it, and then they can see those significant salt savings as time goes on. So creating a liquid infrastructure. This is very important because most of you guys, if you're using just salt right now, you have your salt bin, you have V-box spreaders. All you do is you show up with a skid loader, scoop it up, put it in, and you take off. And that's what you've been doing for many years, and that's, you know, what you're used to. So with liquids, there's other things involved as far as tanks, brine making, water supply, things like that. So those are things we're gonna go over. So having the right knowledge behind using liquids. So again, like I talked about, if you just get a tote of liquid from your buddy, you make a quick little spray bar and start using it, just experimenting with it, that's fine. But we spent a lot of time ourselves actually using these products, experimenting with different additives, different application rates. So the idea is that we at VSI, now linked with Boss Snowplow, can bridge that gap so you don't have those years of frustration and trial and error like we certainly did. Because especially if you're dealing with, you know, parking lots at your customers' properties, you don't want to freeze things up. You want to make sure it's done right the first time. So sulfuride concentration, that's very important. We'll go over that. The different blends, the application rates, situational management. That's really important for you guys in this market here, just because of, again, it's a different climate than what we would deal with in Minnesota. You know, we're a lot colder up there. We get cold, we stay cold. You guys are always kind of on that line of, is it going to be rain? Is it going to be snow? So proper brine plant design and sizing. So you basically have to figure out what's your square footage that you're actually going to be doing, and then you kind of have to start doing some math, and that's something we'll help you with. So basically what you're doing is you figure out, okay, how much brine am I going to need per storm? And then you start, you know, multiply that by 3, so you maybe have 3 storms worth of brine saved up. Basically what you want to do is you want to make sure you have adequate storage and adequate brine making capabilities, so that way you're not actually, you know, really excited to start with liquids, then you spray for half a storm, you run out, and then you have maybe a couple events back to back, then you have to go back to rock salt because you just don't have enough liquid, or you don't have the manpower to actually make enough liquid to get you through the storm. So the other thing, accurate and practical blending and truck fill stations. So that's another thing that's really important to look at is, how are you actually going to fill up your trucks? You know, do you have a very wide service area, or you need to have silo tanks at different sites? Or are you going to have to just come back to the shop to fill up? And also the ease of actually filling up those truck tanks that you have. That's another very important thing, because you want to make it simple and easy to do, because when your operators are out, obviously snow removal is not a done at your leisure type of activity. You're out there, you need to get it done because stuff is going to be opening in 3 hours. You have to get out there and get it taken care of. So you want to make sure it's very simple and very easy to do, and also some of your operators that are running the sprayers, so they don't make a mistake and use the wrong blend, which either ice up your parking lots or cost you a lot of money. So it's very important to make sure you do that. Proper brine plant calibration, so digital or otherwise. So on all VSI brine making units, we actually have what's called the Brine Buddy app. So our sprayers are controlled through an app on your phone, and at the same time, that same app will connect to your brine maker, and that will give you an accurate readout. So some of you that have made brine, you know you have like the floating hydrometers that you put in like a tube, or you take a picture, a sample out of there, or some of the other, you know, actual readers that are out there, very complicated. Basically, they're meant to do a lot of different things. But when they do that, it can get out of calibration very easily, and then you can have an incorrect created that Brine Buddy app. So as you can see right here, this is exactly how it's gonna read out on your phone. So there's no question exactly what that is. We designed that and developed that in-house to make sure it's gonna be accurate and calibrated every single time. So that just takes the guesswork out of it, because having the right salinity level is by far the most important part about making brine. Having the proper filtration, dealing with customers in St. Louis, I know I've seen some pictures and videos of the salt that you guys are lucky enough to get sometimes, where it seems like it's almost a 50-50 blend with sand. That's why it's very important to have the proper filtration to make sure you can keep that out of your sprayers and things like that too. So, and then like I talked about, the remote silo and refill network. So the beauty with the VSI legacy sprayers is, let's say you have a account that's 15 miles away from the shop. It's not gonna make sense all the time for you to drive back to the shop to fill up just to go back to do a couple more accounts. So this way you can have remote silos, you know, like a 3,000 gallon vertical storage tank. The legacy sprayers will actually self-fill. So all you need is a suction hose you hook up to the tank, flip the valves around on the sprayer, and you can self-fill. The reason we added that feature to the sprayers is, this was maybe 9 years ago. We had a couple tanks in not the best part of town, and we had a 2-inch gas pump sitting there with a Rubbermaid tote sitting over the top of it, and I went to fill up. And of course I pull up, that Rubbermaid tote is just kind of thrown up against the fence, and that pump had grown legs and walked away in the middle of the night. So there I was sitting with no way to actually fill up my sprayer. So that's, you know, another one of those things from our own contractor experience, that we added features to the sprayer because we know how frustrating that kind of thing can be. So this way you can just have a tank sitting there and go refill from it too. So the right spray system for our customers. So like I talked about right at the beginning, when someone says, I use liquids, it didn't work, and they have no idea why. One of the biggest reasons for that is they're not putting down enough product, or they're putting down too much product, and they're thinking to themselves, well, this is too expensive to use. That's why it's really important to have something that is contractor friendly. So not only you guys as, you know, maybe owners or operations managers can use it, but that needs to translate to your employees. It has to be very simple and very easy for them to use. Speed rate control, this is very important. So like the legacy sprayers that VSI builds, all you do is you go into the app, you set an application rate in there, and the system is constantly talking, it's GPS signal. So as you're spraying, it's constantly grabbing your speed and adjusting the flow rate based upon your speed. So that way your operators aren't guessing. I mean, think about if you have a VBX. Yeah, you have different settings and everything on there, but do you really know exactly how much you're putting down? That's one of the questions with it. So with this type of system, when you're spraying with it, you can get down precisely to the gallon, how many gallons you actually put on a property. So it's very important to do that. And then also, as an operator too, they make sure that they're putting down the right amount, they're not over applying. Because most of the time guys are gonna over apply just to make sure I don't have to come back here, we don't have slip and falls. They're gonna use more product than they actually have to. So having the volume to handle reasonable application speeds. This is another important thing. There's a lot of manufacturers out there that'll build sprayers that are fine for like a pre-treatment, you know, like 40 gallons per acre. But what they do is they restrict the flow on those sprayers so much that they can't give you the volume. Say if you need 100 gallons per acre for post-treatment, they just can't put out the volume you need at a reasonable speed. So no one's gonna be going 5 miles an hour through a parking lot just to hit their application rate that they need. So that's where the VSI sprayer is an open flow system. We actually have a sprayer outside that we'll fill up with water, and you can actually see the difference between the VSI system and maybe some other manufacturers that you've seen. So the width to cover ground just as fast as the salt spreader. So actually the video in here doesn't load, but basically what we're looking at doing, the VSI legacy sprayer can still spray up to 27 feet wide in 3 independent boom sections. The outer boom sections themselves are actually boomless nozzles, so there's nothing sticking out, you know, beyond the width of the truck itself. So you don't have to worry about clipping that on cars and things like that. So that's one of the knocks when, you know, people have against liquids when they're talking about it. They say basically we can't do it fast enough. A spreader is a lot faster. You can rip in and out of a parking lot and be done. With our spray system, you can spray up to 27 feet wide. So you can cover just as much ground as you need to with a V-Box spreader, but you can be much more precise with your application as well. So, having the flexibility to spray walks into corners and obstacles. So the Legacy Series sprayers come standard with a 100-foot electric rewind hose reel. Like I said, those independent boom sections, you're able to turn them off, and it has about 1/3 of a second response time. So that way you can drive up to, you know, let's say there's a car in the parking lot, you can drive up to it, quickly shut that boom section off, get beyond that car, turn it back on. You're also not gonna have the bounce and scatter that you might have, you know, with a V-Box spreader, where your target application is not gonna get into the landscaping, into the grass, or anywhere it doesn't need to be. So you can be very precise with it. Then also having sidewalk equipment that can quickly and efficiently apply. So I'm sure a lot of you have seen the Snow Raider that Scott's carries here. You know, they have a built-in liquid system, the hose reel on the sprayers themselves. We even have another product called a push pal. It's just a walk behind electric sprayer. So being able to efficiently apply liquid to sidewalks is very important. So another thing here, the right procedures, the proper timing with pre-treatment. So if you folks have done liquids, for the most part, is it pre-treatment when you got started? Yep, pre-treatment, okay. So something you probably, you know, have realized with pre-treatment, for those that haven't done it before, what you actually want to do is get that pre-treatment out before the storm. So you want to make sure it gets applied and actually dries to the surface before any precipitation falls. The beauty with pre-treatment is, let's say you have a storm coming on Thursday, you could go out tonight and pre-treat, you know, and then your guys can get home, get some rest, and then be ready for the storm as it actually comes in. So it's something you can do more at a slower pace, slower pace, and just take care of things, you know, beforehand. So the proper product blend selection. So one thing I hear about, you know, from people in these sort of climates is, you know, salt brine doesn't work. You know, because you guys have a lot of your storms start as rain, transitions maybe some freezing rain, and then go to snow. The difference in Minnesota, like I said, it gets cold up there, it pretty much stays cold until April. So we don't have to worry about that transition. If you're using straight salt brine and your event actually starts as rain, it's very easy for that product to dilute out and really lose its effectiveness. So that's something Scott had mentioned with the additives. So the additives themselves have either magnesium chloride or calcium chloride base to them, but they also then have friction polymers and tackifying agents. Now, the type of additives that we recommend, you know, if you've looked into liquids at all, you know, you hear things about beet juice, things like that. Those are things that we do not recommend because it's a brown sticky liquid. Visibly, it doesn't look very good on sidewalks and parking lots. And then that sort of thing tracks into buildings, and who wants to get a call from a property manager that says, I have brown footprints through my building? Nobody wants to see that. So the additives that we recommend, again, they filter out a lot of those organics, but they still have that light tackifying agent in them to actually help hold it to the pavement. So I've talked to customers in Kansas City, St. Louis, Louisville, Cincinnati, kind of all along that belt line. And what they talk about, instead of using just straight salt brine, what they're doing is using additives at a very low rate, say like a 95-5 blend. That means 95% of your tank is going to be salt brine, and only 5% of it is going to be additives. What that 5% can do is that'll actually adhere to the pavement, combat some of that dilution that you're going to see, and it'll keep it from running off. So some of the customers I've talked to in markets like this have said at, you know, pre-treatment at 40 gallons per acre with a 95-5 blend that's put down and allowed to dry before the actual storm comes, they can handle up to a 1/4 inch of very slow rain. So no, that's fine.
Are you good?
Yeah, we're good. Yep, we're good. So, yeah, so basically that's gonna help hold that in place to make sure it doesn't actually run off, so you still see effectiveness. Now, if you have one of those storms that, you know, dumps 1/2 inch of rain at a very high rate, pre-treatment's really not gonna work for you, whether it be, you know, rock salt or even liquids. So that's one of those things you're just gonna have to manage the storm, just like you do now with plowing. You're just gonna have to watch the weather, see what it does, and make a decision based off of that. So, intra-storm management. So anyone here that does liquids, have you actually sprayed liquids during the event instead of plowing? Okay, yep, so you guys have done we'll do that in Minnesota too with some, maybe some not so intense snow events. I mean, for us, if we're gonna get maybe 2 inches during the day, instead of sending out all of our plow operators to the sites, we'll send out a couple liquid trucks, and we'll just spray drive lanes, main lanes, handicap spots, things like that. So we're not actually trying to go and scrape off a 1/4 inch of snow or anything like that. We're just gonna spray that and manage it with liquids throughout the storm. So, but if we're having an event that's maybe gonna be 8 inches that day, liquid's not gonna be able to keep up with that, we will start plowing it. Yeah, go ahead.
So say your pre-treatment isn't dry with tactical fires, is it still better to have the pre-treatment or not have pre-treatment?
So if you spray it down and it's not dry yet and it starts snowing immediately after, you're really not gonna see much as far as benefits when it comes to pre-treatment. So that's why it's really important to get it out beforehand.
But
You will
will
still
it
see
stop
some-
some of the freeze?
Yeah, it will stop some of it, but it's not gonna be as effective. So you just wanna try to get ahead of the storm as much as you can. So I mean, I know weather forecasting is all over the place. It's hard to actually nail down what's gonna happen because you never get a straight answer. But for the most part, with pre-treatment, at least something is gonna happen tomorrow. So you can get it out there. Now, a huge benefit, especially in this market, because again, it could be rain, it could be snow, it could be nothing. Here, you can actually spray that product out, 40 gallons per acre, it'll dry, and if nothing happens, no one's gonna know. Where if you go out and pre-treat with rock salt, that rock salt's still gonna be there. So I know even in our market, and I've talked to guys in many markets, they've seen this where their competitors are out the day after they pre-treated when nothing happened, with backpack blowers and shovels cleaning up the salt because the customer is really upset that their salt everywhere is getting tracked in the building and nothing ever happened. So that's the nice part with liquids. You can pre-treat, if nothing happens, no one's really gonna know. You might see a little bit of white residue here and there, but for the most part, you're not gonna see it. Yep.
So how would you, like, St. Louis, obviously, sometimes you're on the borderline, you
Yep.
pre-spray it, weather forecasters and all your apps say it's gonna, freezing rain to snow, right on that border, it costs 30 miles either way, it's
Yep.
gonna.
Yeah.
What happens if you pre-treat it and it rains, you don't get snow, or, freezing rain or anything, it's all rain then, it basically washes itself away.
Yeah.
In your previous, when you worked for those other companies, did you basically have to eat the cost, or did you pre-warn the customer, hey, we're gonna pre-treat, but knowing the fact that
Yep.
it is? And also on your apps, does it determine it based off GPS, how much gallons you're using at each facility, or can you arrange that?
Yep. Yeah, so the first part, in our market, we have I think right now with our snow operation, we have 3 clients that pay for pre-treatment. And they understand what they're getting, but basically they have a 0 tolerance and they're willing to pay for it just to give them that extra protection. For pre-treatment for the rest of our properties, we'll do it based on, what we feel is gonna be best for us. So if we're gonna have a daytime event, that's gonna be 4 inches. A lot of times we will pre-treat everything on our own dime just to make sure it gives us enough time to get to all of our sites, especially on the sidewalks. So we have 2 crews, 2 guys each, and they have a snow raider. They can't be everywhere at once, and if it's 10 a.m., every property manager is gonna be wondering, why aren't you at our site first? So at least with a pre-treatment, maybe that first 1/4 inch of snow is just gonna melt itself off, give us an opportunity to get our crews at every single site, just to make our appearance so we can manage the storm through there. But we just all understand the customers have no patience. So we'll do it on our own dime, just for some of that reassurance that we can get everywhere. If we're gonna have a big event, in Minnesota, if we're gonna get 14 inches of snow, we know we're gonna be pushing a lot of snow with our equipment, whether it be loaders, tractors, trucks. We'll pre-treat to make sure there's no bonding of that snow and ice to the surface. So when we're going over the top of it, we actually get the traction that we need to push, a big push box full of, 12 inches of snow. So a lot of times we'll do it for our benefit. So a lot of times too, customers, if it's a seasonal contract, maybe it's built into the contract, they're paying for it anyway. But that's something too, you'll kind of have to work with your customers on if they're requesting it, or if they're paying per pre-treatment, that they understand we're doing this, for a, protection for ourselves against maybe some slip and falls, and to make sure once we pre-treat, and, we're doing this because if it does snow on top of it, when we clear it off, and then we can spray on top of it again, we're gonna have the safest surface possible. Because in reality, how much does a pre-treatment cost compared to a slip and fall? That's what you're kind of weighing out. So, does that answer your question?
Yeah, partially, I mean, basically it's case by case.
Yeah, it's
customer
case by case, yep.
You know.
Again, we're dealing with Mother Nature, so
Right.
you can never, when you think you're making the right decision, it's usually wrong, because it throws you a curveball, so. I mean, I can recall, when I was in charge of snow and ice, there's probably 6 or 7 times we went out and pre-treated, because they were talking 6 inches of snow, and it was gonna be during the day, and absolutely nothing happened, and it was sunny. Like, the storm just completely fell apart, hit some dry air, when it was 100 miles west of us, nothing happened. So, those are just kind of the lumps that you take
Okay.
when it comes to doing snow.
And then what about like your GPS trackers with?
Yep, okay, yeah.
Or I might have gotten ahead of, you know.
Yeah, no, that's something we'll talk about too. So, on the app itself, it doesn't go based off of, you know, your GPS every site you've been at. There is a tracking feature on there. So basically you go in, you start the job, it will give you a GPS coordinate of where you were when you started that job. It'll be your time that you were there, it'll track what came out of your hose reel, it'll track what came out of your boom, it'll give you approximate acres covered, then you can even enter your brine blend in there. So, let's say we're spraying a 95.5 blend, that'll show up. And then when you end the job, it'll give you your end time. You can also put notes in there too. So let's say there's 8 loading docks at this facility, and 6 of them were blocked by trucks you couldn't spray. You can note that in there, so if the customer ever comes back and says, "You never sprayed here," well, we couldn't because it was blocked with trucks. So once you get through, you can do every site that way. At the end, you can hit submit report. That way you can email it to whoever's in charge of snow, whoever your manager is, and that's a CSV file. So what means, it's like a spreadsheet that can't be corrupted or changed or anything like that. So if you ever do have a slip and fall, and you get a call from an insurance company and says, "Hey, you know, my client had a slip and fall on your property," here's the sheet, it shows, you know, let's say they had a slip and fall at 7:15 in the morning, you can say, you know, we ended our spraying here at 6:12 in the morning, this is how much we put down based on recommended application rates and additive rates by the manufacturer. This is what we did. You know, we were in and out of there 45 minutes before it happened. And I know I've talked to customers that have actually had that, presented it to their insurance company and said, "Here you go, take this." And after that, they never heard anything again. It was just somebody just trying to make a little cash. So it's really good to have that protection, you know, for you from liability standpoint, and then also just tracking, you know, to track your job costs and everything like that too. So the right mechanical removal. This is something that's overlooked. Liquid is not a miracle product all by itself. Now, some people use a lot of liquids to basically take care of any situation that comes up. And a lot of times they have the brine operation as far as the plant and the storage tank to make that happen. But when you're talking about how we're actually plowing your lots, mechanical removal is very important. So for example, if you're just using rubber edge pushers on a heavy wet snow and actually leaving a lot of hard pack there, you're always gonna need more liquid product to combat that. Now if you're using, you know, like a steel edge or like a floating edge system, like a metal plus live edge, Arctic sectional, something like that, where you get a really clean scrape, that's when you start seeing liquids really have a huge benefit, because you're using less liquid product. The other thing with some of those, you know, Arctic sectionals, metal plus live edge, when you actually scrape that parking lot clean, sometimes if the parking lot is in good enough shape and you spread rock salt over the top of it, there's not enough moisture left behind to actually start activating that salt and creating that solution on the surface. So a lot of times with certain mechanical methods of snow removal, liquids is actually gonna be much better and rock salt will be less effective because of that. So how many here run like sectional type plows? Okay, you do? Okay. So have you ever seen that too, when you actually scrape it clean, spread rock salt, there may not be a whole lot of moisture left behind to actually activate that salt. Because what you're doing with rock salt, when you spread it out, each salt granule hits, you know, a certain spot, and then it starts melting that snow and ice, and you can see that start to expand around each salt granule. Once it completely connects with each other, that's when you made salt brine on the surface. So if there's not a lot of moisture to actually work with, sometimes rock salt's not that effective. So again, proper techniques with any equipment, not overlapping, speed of travel, things like that. So as far as speed of travel goes, we had a customer up in Minnesota that they watched us using liquids. They're like, "Man, this is great, let's get into it." They got a sprayer and a brine maker. And they said, "We're just not seeing the results that you guys are seeing." went up and visited with them during a snowstorm. And what we were noticing is they were sending out trucks to plow, 4 or 5 acre parking lots. And of course, Rob, is it 14 miles an hour? Is that what Boss recommends, the fastest you plow?
Yeah, you know what, I don't know the.
Okay, I think it's like 14 or
Yeah,
something.
it's
Well,
a lot lower than what people plow at. that's for sure.
Exactly, yeah. So once you start actually getting some of that speed, I don't care what plow you have on your truck, it's gonna start to actually ride up on top of that snow, and you're gonna leave more hard pack. That's what this customer was doing. They were doing that and using rubber edge pushers. Especially in Minnesota, rubber edge pushers is not effective because it's just so cold. You're gonna leave that just blaze of hard pack. So again, it's one of those things where they had to slow down with their trucks a little bit, get a cleaner scrape, then they were more effective with liquids. So if they kept their speed up and leaving all that hard pack with the rubber edges, I mean, they were spraying 110 gallons an acre when they were trying to do 80 gallons per acre. Again, very important to make sure you have the right application rates. So liquid will also not efficiently burn through 1 inch of snowpack and ice. So that's why pre-treatment is important, in those situations, especially daytime events. But also if you think about, we'll get into the science a little bit behind liquids, but you're using less salt than you would if you were using rock salt. That's what liquids are. So basically you have less salt to actually burn through that hard pack. So that's something that's important as far as mechanical removal and the prevention of that bond. So the right additives. So like I talked about, in this market, or markets like this, a lot of times people say, well, it's not cold enough for us to use additives. Yes, up in Minnesota, we use additives for cold weather protection for the most part. Because I've been out in a parking lot at -22 de-icing. That's something I'm sure none of you have ever experienced. Probably not even close. We had a winter, I think it was 4 years ago. It was consistently below 0 when it snowed. And I mean, that's actually pretty common for us up in Minnesota. So we're using those additives to give us that cold weather protection where even in our market, you're spreading treated rock salt, gets below 0, there's nothing that's really gonna help it anymore. Or if you get any assistance, it's with traffic and with sunlight. That's the only way you're gonna get anything to start happening. The nice part with the additives that we use, we're able to actually go out and apply it. It's gonna melt off, we all go home, we go to bed, we don't get callbacks. So, but for you guys, you're using additives more for combating dilution from heavy wet snows, and then also tackifier agents that are in there to actually adhere it to the pavement. So it's important to select your additives carefully. So most major options, some of you use them or have heard of them. You have AMP, B-Heat, Road Guard 8, Fusion, IBG Magic, Magic -0, Headwaters Hot, and Heat Wave. So there's a lot of options that are actually out there, especially since liquid has become more popular over the years. From my experience, what we like and what we use is AMP and Headwaters Hot. Now, AMP is actually a magnesium chloride based product that has the friction polymers, has the tackifying agents, and also has corrosion inhibitors in it as well. So that's what we like using that. Headwaters Hot is pretty much the same, but it's just calcium chloride based. But the difference between those and maybe some of the other ones is like IBG Magic that have a really high content of like sugar beet molasses, things like that, where it's a brown kind of sticky liquid. It was designed for the municipal market years ago because it will get on your tires, it will track for miles down the road, and that's perfect for that situation. But let's be honest, your customers, in your industrial complexes, apartment complexes, they're not going to want to have a sticky brown liquid that's in their parking lot, in their sidewalks, that tracks into their buildings. So that's why it's very important to select the right additive. All these additives do work. I mean, they all are effective at doing, the low temperatures, adhering it to the pavement and everything, but there's some that are just a little bit better than others as far as cleanliness. So those are all things too that if you ever come across an additive that maybe is new and you want some suggestions or advice on it, you're more than welcome to reach out to us at VSI. We'll be happy to take a look at it and give you a recommendation. So another thing here, watch out for mineral well brine or straight mag or calcium. So has anyone used mineral well brine before? Okay, you have. What was your experience with it?
Spotty.
Okay.
Inconsistency.
Yeah, yep, and that's the problem. You're pulling this product directly out of a well in the ground. You can get 2 tanker loads that are great, you're really excited about it, everything's working, and then you get your next tanker load and it's inconsistent. Because again, it's just being pulled right from the ground and put into a truck and sent wherever. So you can have different blends of calcium, magnesium, maybe your salt brine consistency is a little bit off. You might be at too high of a salinity level and it's not actually gonna work. Also, magnesium chloride and calcium chloride, they're friendly chlorides to a point, but if you mix too much of them together, basically they butt heads, fall out of solution. So I've cleaned out more tanks than I care to admit, from us doing experimenting with different additives together, maybe not cleaning out our tank prior to that. It can really cause a mess. What I would kind of say, maybe like a cottage cheese blend inside a tank, it's not really fun. So another thing, straight mag and straight calcium. Has anyone used a straight product like that? Okay, what was your experience with that?
The mag was tougher than the calcium, but both of them they'll both, if you spray just straight mag or straight calcium, you're gonna wind up with a mess on the ground.
Yep. So from our experience too, we've done a little straight mag, a little bit straight calcium, not really good results. We've even mixed straight mag and cal at like a 90-10 blend in our tanks, so with salt brine and like straight calcium. We tried that one year because it was a lot cheaper. Like, let's get a tanker load of it, see what happens. So we had an event that was really high moisture content that fell during the day. A lot of traffic, a lot of hard pack, and that's when we were using rubber edge pushers. We really couldn't scrape the parking lots clean. It was quite a problem. We had a lot of hard pack. So we went in at about 11 o'clock at night and sprayed with a 90-10 blend with straight calcium chloride at like 100 gallons per acre. The first parking lot we sprayed, I mean, it was melting right away. Calcium chloride is pretty volatile. It's going to create water from snow and ice very quickly. The problem was, about a half hour later, I came back to that first parking lot. I pulled in, hit the brakes on my truck, and I slid like 30 feet. And I thought, oh crap, what happened? So what was actually happening is that calcium chloride was generating that water so quickly that it was actually diluting out the salt brine. It wasn't giving it that time to actually dry out and evaporate away that moisture. So then we actually, instead of having a rough, slippery surface, we basically took a Zamboni over the whole parking lot. And we did that with all our parking lots. So luckily it happened, at 11 o'clock at night. We just came back with straight brine and hit everything like 2 or 3 times, got everything melted off. None of our customers knew about it, but it was probably the most stressful night of my life.
Was that a 90% calcium, 10%?
No, 90% salt brine, 10% calcium. So even that mix by itself did not work for us. It was a very bad night, but that's when we started to realize these additives, when they have these corrosion inhibitors, melting inhibitors, what it actually does is slows down the melting process and allows that salt brine to dry out and evaporate away that moisture. So that's why we always recommend using one of these additives, because there's a lot of other things in them, but they're there for a reason. So especially too, like magnesium and calcium, those are used in dust control. So if you're spraying that on a gravel road in summer, the reason it's effective for dust control is pulling moisture out of the air and getting it down into that gravel and basically keeping it wet to keep it from actually being dusty, to keep that dust down. So that's another thing too, especially in your market here, you have a lot more humidity in winter than say we do in Minnesota. I mean, we're 7 hours north of you and it's like a completely different world. So for us, we've even experienced that too. When we were testing with it, it would still pull what little humidity was in the air, pull it down into the mixture, and instead of actually getting that to evaporate away and dry out, what would happen is it would just kind of be a slushy solution on the sidewalks and the parking lots that we could just never really get rid of. So that's why it's important to actually have that salt brine for that drying effect in it.
With the mag and calcium, you're talking -20 and a lot colder up there.
Yep.
Down here, we don't have necessarily, we're usually right around that freezing point or just below in
Yep.
the storm. Would that be a benefit?
Yes. Yep, that's why it's still beneficial, because you do have a higher moisture content snow down here generally, especially if you're right on that kind of freeze line. That's why it's important to have that to combat that dilution, because it's gonna basically stabilize the mixture and keep it from diluting out and refreezing. So that's why it's very important. And again, down here, we're not talking a high additive rate. Minnesota, we're at 10%, and we pretty much use that all winter long. We don't really change from it because it's always so cold. Down here, with a product like Headwaters or AMP, a lot of times we'll recommend a 95.5 blend. So again, it's a very small percentage of your actual tank is gonna be that additive, so you're actually saving money too. You're not, some of these other ones, they'll recommend 20% or even 30%. And if you're looking at additives that cost $2.50 a gallon, it gets very expensive. So that's why it's more important to get a better quality additive, maybe a higher price because you're using less of it. I kind of use the example of if you're going to get some cleaning products, if you get the cheapest, store brand you can, from Walmart, or you get a bottle of 409, the 409 is going to use less product, to actually get something clean because it's a better product. It's the kind of the same concept when it comes to additives. So a pitfall is trying to change your entire operations to liquid overnight. We've had a few customers that do it, but again, they had the financial backing behind them to make it happen, and they had the commitment from their entire team to make it happen. So it's really going to be something that's going to be hard for someone to actually go from rock salt to liquids in 1 year. It's usually a process where you learn with it, you experiment with it, and then every year as you get a new truck, maybe instead of getting a salt spreader, you switch it to a liquid spray, liquid spray system. So I always recommend pick specific accounts on routes and focus on them. So instead of doing, all right, we're going to do liquids at this site, this storm, then we're going to do liquids over here this storm, maybe liquids are at another site, another storm, keep it consistent. Focus on maybe 3 accounts you're going to do liquids on in the first year, so that way you can really see the difference. Especially with liquids, when you get it into the pores of the asphalt and the concrete, start building up that residual, you're going to see the difference between liquids and rock salt that you're actually using. So, but it's good to kind of just stick with certain properties and learn with liquids right there, so you have a good case study on that one site that you're actually doing. So again, it's the same manager, same operator, same machines. Observe, build up your notebook and learn what worked on that site, and then you can translate it to other sites in the future. So, like you say, all the education in the world won't teach you as much as observing and doing. So again, like this PowerPoint today, we also have a liquid implementation guide, 17 pages of info. It's really good to have, but until you actually get out there and start doing it and seeing how it reacts on your sites, that's going to be your best learning tool, because every market is a little bit different, every climate's a little bit different. So sidewalks are the best and easiest places to start. The customer will notice high dollar savings for the contractor. Like I was talking with you earlier, you said that's how you got started. Liquids on sidewalks, because it's easier to do, the equipment is a little bit cheaper, especially if you have a snow raider that already has a liquid kit built into it. What does it hurt to give it a try? You already have it on there. Or just the other sidewalk equipment that's available. It's cheaper to do that than set up a truck with a larger sprayer. So sidewalks are also going to be a good place to start this with, because your customer will notice that difference. Instead of having the rock salt track into their buildings from their sidewalks, they're going to have that liquid that's not going to track into the buildings. So a very good and more affordable way to actually start. So again, having the right confidence, this stems from education. So the fact that you guys are here today learning about it, the ones that have actually done liquids before, anytime you can get more education and maybe hear different ideas from people to see how you can implement it in your operation, that's very good. So the more confident you are in your process that you actually do on customer properties, even if you have customers that are maybe a little apprehensive about liquids on their parking lots because they've only seen rock salt. So the more confident you are, the easier it's going to be to actually sell to customers. So again, know the key information, application rates, the guidelines, and learn based from your experiences. So the more you experiment with it, the more you can, when you're talking to customers about it, you can say, we had a situation like this last year, we were able to use liquid and be really effective with it. Other sites we did rock salt with, it didn't really work. So that way you can just have that experience to share with the customer. So every climate, even every account is different. So you guys will have parking lots that were put in brand new last year, nice smooth asphalt, easy to scrape off and keep it clean. That's going to react differently than the parking lot that probably should have been replaced 25 years ago. A lot of broken asphalt, a lot of So you're gonna have to worry about putting some more product down to be effective there. So again, more comes from doing with proper basic info. So knowing the basics of it and actually learning. Yep.
What's your opinion on if you're gonna start moving into this, putting like wedding kits on rock salt?
Yep, so that's a good place to start too. Yep, and that's something I should have mentioned. So, you know, some of the boxes out there actually have pre-wedding kits. And the nice part with, you know, those kits, it's something that's actually going to jumpstart the process of that phase change with rock salt as soon as it comes out. So instead of waiting for it to hit the ground and then start to melt and have some liquid with it, it's gonna activate it right away as soon as it's coming out of the spinner. So that's a very good place to start too. Yep, Scott?
Won't you use about 30% rock, less rock if you're wetting?
Yep, that's what I've heard. So us personally, we've experimented a tiny bit with pre-wetting in Minnesota. We're pretty much just committed to doing all liquids, but I don't know the exact number, but I have heard 30% before too. Just pre-wetting your rock salt when it comes out. So again, you're just activating it before it even hits the ground. So you're gonna get things moving faster. The other thing, don't listen to the liquid doesn't work narrative. So one example, the GIE Expo in Louisville that we go to, the first year we were there in 2016, I'd say half the people that walked by the booths just kind of looked at it and go, yeah, liquids don't work. They kept moving on. But every year there's less and less people that are skeptical about it because they see other people in their market actually doing liquids, and then they drive by their lots and they're like, their lots look great and ours look like crap. What are they doing different? And they understand that, okay, maybe we've tried liquids in the past, we just probably weren't doing it right. So again, they say liquid doesn't work. We have customers in the St. Louis market that have been doing it very successfully. We've been doing it in Minnesota in an extremely cold climate. So between St. Louis and Minnesota, if both of us can make it work, anybody can make it work. So again, we talked about how to sell liquids. We've kind of gone over this a little bit. You know, getting educated like you are here today, demonstrating for your customers. I know we've had customers that have said, you know, we don't really like liquids, we're not sure about it. Just go spray their, you know, front drive lane for them once, just so they can see the difference. Once they start seeing how it acts differently than rock salt does tracking to buildings, things like that, you start to actually kind of build their confidence in the liquid process. Be an advocate for liquids in your market. So again, showing what you're doing, you know, talking about it. We've had customers too that, you know, maybe talk to someone with the local news station and talk about the benefits of liquids as far as the environment, you know, saving salt, things like that. You know, just be that guy in your market that's actually saying, we're doing this a different way, these are the benefits of it. And then like I said, you know, showcasing it. So showing it to customers, showing it to other contractors in your market, just know that, you know, you're the one that's getting this going in your market. So using local resources to connect customers to the community. So in Minnesota, the MPCA, or the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency, what they do is they offer things called smart salting seminars. And what they do is they bring, you know, contractors, municipalities in and talk to them about, you know, the importance of reducing the chlorides that are actually going into, you know, our rivers, our streams, into our lakes, our groundwater, things like that. That's what they're pushing for. But those are good education opportunities. I'm not sure if there's any opportunities like that in Missouri. It's something we probably have to look into a little bit. Down here, maybe they haven't done this, but I know in Minnesota they actually had a, basically they had a program where you could get low interest loans, you know, from the MPCA, that if you could prove over time how much rock salt you saved, they would forgive those loans. So basically you're getting free liquid equipment to prove that you're actually, you know, reducing the chlorides that you put into the groundwater, lakes, rivers, and streams. So, like I say, as a taxpayer, I hate programs like that, but as a, you know, someone who sells liquid de-icing equipment, that's great. So some people that may be apprehensive about spending the money, maybe there is a program like that. It's something worth looking into. So again, the 25 to 35% salt savings and pre-wetting, like we talked about a little bit, it activates faster. You can make regular rock salt what you would call a hot mix. So again, this is very inexpensive to implement. As far as I know right now, Boss maybe does not have the pre-wet system available on the BBXs. I think that's just due to a microchip shortage, but I could see that coming back, especially with having, VSI on board.
We can make them pretty easy.
Okay, yep,
I mean,
so,
it won't be quite as accurate
Yep.
as that, but you'll have to adjust by your valve, but
yep,
you can make pre-wet systems and tie it into your impeller or your auger when you kick it on and
yep.
it's gonna wet. for
So
you.
if it's something you actually wanna experiment with, Scott's your guy to talk to, so they'll help you out and get you going in the right direction. So again, very inexpensive way to get started. So a liquid program, 35% plus salt savings. So liquid pre-treatment, that's the bond prevention. So we're trying to stop that snow and ice from actually sticking to the pavement. So it can either start melting, as soon as that precipitation falls, or once you blade it off, it's gonna peel up a little bit easier. So again, helping reduce the accumulation, prevents surface frost, and helps reduce that freeze-thaw cycle. So again, concrete, it's very hard on, that when water gets into it and you get that freeze and thaw back and forth, it's very hard on it. So if you can have that product that sits in the pores of that concrete and prevent that freeze-thaw, it's gonna extend the life of your concrete as well. So very inexpensive to apply. So when we talk about what it costs to make salt brine, it's pretty cheap, the $5 to $8 per acre to actually do it. So even like you were talking in your situation, if you spray it out and nothing happened, at least you're not out a lot of money. It's pretty cheap to do it. So when we talk about a 40 to 70% salt savings, why such a big range? So the liquid post-treatment, that's the rock salt alternative. So in Minnesota, that's all we do. Again, we don't spread any rock salt. We're doing strictly liquids. So best for dry snow or fairly cleanly scraped surfaces. So liquids would be more effective because, one example, in Minnesota, the average application rate of rock salt on a 1 acre parking lot is 1,000 pounds. And that's just due to our temperatures. We get a lot of hard pack, things like that. 1,000 pounds. If you were to come through with one of our liquid spray systems set at 100 gallons per acre, and you apply on that exact parking lot where they would do rock salt, even if you spray 100 gallons of salt brine out, salt brine is 2.28 pounds of rock salt per 1 gallon of water. That's 1 gallon of salt brine. So if you do that math, you put down 228 pounds of rock salt compared to 1,000. It's kind of an extreme example, but it just shows you the differences that you can actually make in reducing your overall salt usage. So we talked about the hot blends, working down to -30. Like I said, I've been in a parking lot myself at -22, and it's really cool to walk up and splash your boot in a puddle of water. And it stays that way. So massive salt savings when used in the right situation. So these two pictures here are a great example. So we've all seen this one on the right, and some of us are probably guilty of that too, where you're spreading rock salt throughout the storm, trying to stay on top of things. You have all this residue. It almost looks like the parking lot was painted white. Brine post-treatment, since we're using less rock salt, you can see there's a little bit of residue here and there, but for the most part, it's a clean black parking lot. So that's the differences you can see with liquids, and I'm sure the guys in this market that have used liquids have seen that difference too, right? Yeah, much cleaner. So again, selling the anti-ice value. So like right here, this is actually done in Minneapolis. Using a snow raider, they're actually doing this full treatment here. So you can actually see, the customer will have a visual that you pre-treated and everything. This is demonstrated to the snow raider itself, doing some liquid pre-treatment, and yeah, that's me on the snow raider. So, but yeah, just selling that value so the customer can actually see, and when they see these nice clean lines like this throughout their sidewalks, it looks really nice, and you're showing the difference that it's actually making. Right here, we're comparing like the snow raider to actually using a hose reel. It's much easier to get that consistent application with the snow raider because it has the nozzles and you're driving with it. Hose reel sometimes doesn't have a real good visual, just because you're walking with the hose, and somebody might be getting to the end of the sidewalk and they really don't care anymore. It's much better visual on that side. So this is actually a parking lot in the city of Maple Grove, Minnesota. So these are two adjacent parking lots done at the same date and time. So this was a very light snowfall accumulation. This was pre-treated with a 95.5 blend with the AMP product. So this was pre-treated, and then this, I believe the difference from when it snowed to when this happened here was about 40 minutes. So they pre-treated here, and this one they came back and post-treated with rock salt. It's hard to see on the picture up here, but you can actually see little spots where it's starting to work. But basically, this is something they did before the storm. It took care of itself. This is something they had to react to the snow that actually fell. So something we talked about with the bounce and scatter, with a V-box spreader, salt killing things in the landscape and aquaculture. So this is a really, really interesting stat here. 1 teaspoon of salt will permanently pollute 5 gallons of water. So just think about your V-box spreader when you're actually spreading. How many teaspoons of salt are actually in there? Now, not all that salt is going to make its way all the way to the groundwater, to lakes and streams, but it's going to get filtered through the ground and everything like that. But just know, all the salt you actually spread will pollute water. It's going to get there at some point. So salt can also cause vegetative burns, resulting in heavy landscape losses. Salt-tolerant invasive fish kill off native game fish, which adversely impacts water activities and tourism. So I'll stand up here and say I'm not a big environmentalist guy. I'm sure a lot of us really aren't, but there is something to be said about this. Every ton of salt we spread, you have to think about what it's actually going to do down the road. So I go ice fishing in Minnesota. I really enjoy that, and it's like that's something that someday I want my kids to be able to enjoy as well. So that's where being very aware of what we're actually doing. The other thing too about vegetative burns, I'm sure you all have had on your properties that strip along the sidewalks with the dead grass from the salt. The nice part with liquids, again, when you spray it, that's where it stays. It's not going to bounce, it's not going to roll off that sidewalk. Also, when you spray it, it gets into the pores of the concrete on that sidewalk. Even if you come over the top of it with a shovel or even like a snow raider blade, you're blading the snow off, and that actual de-icing product is going to sit in the the cracks, the pores, and everything like that. You're not actually blading it off. So for us, VSI has built jet agitated hydroseeders in the past. People ask us, does this work for salt kill? In spring, you're going to repair that. I say, yeah, it probably would. We've never had that. We just don't deal with that. The only damage that we repair in spring is where if we actually went off the sidewalk and bladed up some of the sod, or where we're stacking the corner of a parking lot, maybe we'll scrape up some of that, but that's what we repair. We're not replacing trees and shrubs and grass in spring because we killed it with salt. So, again, this is based off Minnesota. De-icing salt is the #1 source of chloride use in Minnesota. Estimated that just close to 702,000 tons of road salt is applied in Minnesota, and just under 400,000 tons is just in the Twin Cities metro area. So you can translate that to St. Louis. Think of the concentrated amount of road salt that's applied just in this market and where it ends up. So, University of Minnesota study found 78% of the salt applied in the Twin Cities for winter maintenance is either transported to groundwater or remains in the local lakes and wetlands. So again, keep thinking about that as you're actually using that rock salt, what you're doing. So, selling the savings to the client. Have any of you that do liquids have issues selling it to your clients? Like the fact that they're like, I don't know what liquid is, I don't want that. So people are pretty receptive to it in this market. Okay, that's good. So for the client, call reduction. So fewer early calls to sites by client, overall reduction in number of visits to site after the snowfall. So using the right additive blends, like when I was in charge of the snow and ice operation, the nice part was we could come in after we plowed, hit everything with our liquid, and everybody went home. I mean, I can think of 2 times where a client actually called me for us to come back and do something. Because again, we were using the right additives, and in our market, even if it's 0 degrees, everything would melt off. Where our competitors come and spread rock salt, and it was 0 degrees, nothing would happen, and then the customer would say, hey, can you come back and hit it at the end of the day, just because it didn't really do much. So then we're talking about even more salt savings. So we came in with 1 application application of liquid, where some of our competitors did 2 applications or maybe even 3, to still not even get the results that we had. So you're saving a ton of salt and saving a ton of money. So again, the better maintenance practices of brine. So you're scraping the surface cleaner with shovel, broom, or plow, reduce compaction, and reduce hours on the client's site. So if you're on a seasonal contract, the less time you can spend on the site, the better off you're gonna be. This is another big one, the corrosion and cleaning cost reduction. So, for me, since I've been in this industry for a long time, every time I go into a gas station or something, when I open the door, I always look in the door frames and things like that, look at the bottom of the gas pumps, and you can see that corrosion starting, especially if you're looking at automatic doors, revolving doors. You know, there's a lot going on there as far as moving parts, and they're very expensive too. So if you can, you know, reduce the amount of repairs that the customer has to do to their property, you know, their doorways and things like that, I mean, that's huge, and that's a really big selling point for them. So another study through Fortin Consulting, the total cost of infrastructure damage from 1 ton of salt is estimated to be between $800 and $3,300. So again, that's talking about light poles, it's talking about grass, landscaping, trees, you know, flooring inside the buildings, the concrete, the asphalt itself, or if you're talking about parking structures, you know, that's a whole nother thing with that too. So every ton of salt you spread, you are causing infrastructure damage. Now, when you're using liquid products, you're not completely getting away from rock salt, but at least you're going in the right direction. You're using less salt. So, and then number 1 is the risk reduction. Reduce ice formation early in an event to overall reduce compaction, directly impacts slip and fall. Another big benefit to this is, I'm sure, you know, you guys have the concrete parking stops, you're gonna have stairways, you're gonna have, you know, curb lines. When you're actually using rock salt, you can't get that product to stick to a vertical surface. With liquids, you can actually spray a set of steps, you can spray the face of curbs, especially if you have a freezing fog or maybe a freezing rain situation. That's where a lot of slip and falls occur, when someone's foot is actually going up onto the curb. So if you can make that a safe surface, you're gonna reduce the slip and falls that you would actually see. So again, we talked about the selling savings, you know, showing clients. I've even gone into other parking lots that I knew I wanted to bid the next year, and I take pictures of what their parking lots actually look like. And then I take pictures of the parking lots that we did right next door, so the customers can see the difference that our level of service makes compared to their competitor, or to our competitor who's currently servicing their property. So now we're going to talk about pricing a little bit. So this is from Rochester Institute of Tech and New York State Pollution Prevention Institute. So these are talking about, you know, just different sets of stores with the same owner, miles apart, you know, talking about the cost per parking space and the number of parking spaces. So one of the things like we talked about is the landscape damage, slip and fall incidents, decreasing, things like that. These are all huge benefits to liquid itself. So as far as that goes, I don't know what it's like in St. Louis, but we have customers in New York State, and basically they say if there's a slip and fall in the parking lot, the first call that person that fell is to their lawyer, and the second one is to 911. The average slip and fall claim in the state of New York comes out to like $240,000. So that's something that we all have to be mindful of, because you have enough slip and falls, that might be a situation where your insurance company says, no more, find someone else, we're not going to cover you anymore. So, and no one wants to see a slip and fall in their parking lot anyway. I mean, especially in winter, if you see an ambulance in a parking lot that you service and someone's laying on the ground because they broke their leg because they fell, that's not a good look on you either. So, no one wants to have to go through that. So, any questions or anything else on the presentation, liquids in general, equipment, anything like that?
How long will the brine stay in suspension?
So when you're actually mixing brine, you want it to get to 23.3%. So that's what's actually called the eutectic point. So eutectic point is meaning the molecules of the salt can be as densely packed as possible while still being able to generate the most amount of energy. That's like your perfect spot you want to be in. So something too, I've talked to people that have made salt brine themselves. yeah, you might think, well, I'm gonna make a 25% salt brine, just to give it a little extra kick, right? Everyone thinks more salt is gonna be better. In this case, it's not, because you start going over that 23.3%, those molecules are more densely packed, they can't move around, they can't generate energy, so your freeze point actually goes up. So if you were to actually look at it on a graph, so you start at 0% salinity, and you work your way down to 23.3%, it's a very, very slow curve downward. Once you get above 23.3%, it shoots up very quickly. So if you have 26% salt brine, you're actually gonna be basically freezing at 32 degrees. So if you spray that on the parking lot, it's gonna freeze right away and you're gonna be like, what the heck happened? But if you mix it to 23.3%, it'll stay in solution, in suspension, you know, as long as you want. So it's not actually gonna fall out. So that's why, like with our brine making systems, that 23.3% is very, very important. In fact, I tell people when they're making brine, try to stay under 23.3, because 22% salt brine is gonna be much more effective than a 24.5% salt brine. There's a huge difference there. So, very important to make sure your salinity level is right. If you are buying it from a supplier, which I know plenty of people do, make sure they understand that. Those are some basic questions you need to ask them. What are you mixing your salinity level to? If they say, I don't know, like 25%, run away from that. Never buy anything from them because they don't understand the science behind that.
So you theoretically mix it now, you use it January 1.
Yep, and I know like some of you guys too, you guys actually start making brine in, yeah. Yep, November. I mean, in Minnesota it's a little different because our winter starts sooner, but yeah, I know guys right now in Minnesota, they're making brine for a few weeks. So they just build up their, you know, basically inventory of liquids before the season starts. So it's, because usually if you're in, you know, landscape maintenance, things like that, you're working up until the day it snows. You know, you're out there getting as much done as you can, because I can remember one site where I was actually cleaning up leaves, and then I loaded up the mower, drove back to the shop, put a sprayer in the truck, and drove right back to that same site because we had freezing rain. And that was all in the matter of like an hour and a half maybe. So again, I worked up as far as I could. And once we got that freezing rain from that point on, it started snowing. So that was it. Those are the last leaves I cleaned up all year. So.
Also, at brine makers that need to be in a heated facility or outside?
Yep, so that's something we recommend. Now, some people do keep them outside, and you can get away with it, but a lot of times I would recommend actually putting like a heat tape around all the plumbing and everything. And anytime that brine maker is sitting there, make sure your solution is 23.3% actually in that tank to make sure it's not gonna freeze. So the freeze point of salt brine at 23.3% is -6. So if it's just sitting there, it's, you know, 0 degrees, it's not gonna freeze up. Even if you start getting below that, it starts to kind of get slushy, but it doesn't usually freeze hard until you get very cold. But for the most part, you know, you're gonna be okay, but it's much easier to make it in a heated facility. So I know some guys, if they don't wanna have their brine maker in their shop, they'll just build a small building, you know, next to their salt shed, and they'll keep it heated to 38 or 40 degrees. It doesn't have to be really warm, but just keep it above freezing to make sure if your salinity level is not exactly where it should be, you're not gonna freeze and break your pump or any of your plumbing fittings or anything like that. It just makes your life easier if it's inside. You don't have to worry about it as much. So we spent one winter making brine in an unheated building in Minnesota. That was not fun. Of course, we filled it up with just a garden hose. And multiple times I showed up there and someone had left the hose, because there was an office attached to this building that was kept above freezing, just so the plumbing wouldn't freeze. And there was many times I showed up, someone forgot to take the hose and put it in that office again. So a lot of late night trips to Home Depot to buy another garden hose because you can't thaw that thing out fast enough. So it just, yeah, it's much easier to deal with if it's inside. So yeah, but
Do the additives have to be added when you make the brine, or can it be added later?
so one of the important things with your brine maker is that when you're actually making brine, you use straight white rock salt. You don't actually use anything treated, because that salinity reader is actually going off the density of the liquid that's in there. So if you have something introduced into it like a magnesium chloride or calcium chloride, the density will change, you can't get a good reading. So that's why it's important, you never introduce additives into your brine maker itself. the brine makers we have, they have a manifold system where you can use the pump on the brine maker to, draw your additive out of a storage tank and fill it into a truck. But it never actually goes into the brine hopper itself. So that's very important. I know I've dealt with customers before that liquid works great for them, and then they have a storm where it doesn't work. Come to find out, the guy that usually makes brine was on vacation, and he showed another guy how to make it, but the guy wasn't paying attention. And again, you guys get really dirty salt in St. Louis, and he was sick of cleaning the brine maker out. So he decided he was gonna pull from the treated salt pile to make salt brine. I got a picture, because this guy couldn't figure it out. He goes in their little brine making area, and he basically, like the Sandals Jamaica advertisements, that kind of greenish blue water. That's what his salt brine looked like, because he was using a treated salt in it. It's like, there you go, that's your problem. So that's why it's also important when you're making brine, when you have certain guys trained in to do it. I always tell people, have a small group of guys that totally understand it. They're the only ones allowed to touch the brine maker. Like, I've been at sites, helping guys, get their brine maker set up and training them how to do it. And the owner actually says, these 4 guys are the only ones allowed to touch the brine maker. If I catch anyone touching the brine maker, you're fired. Just because he understands the importance of knowing exactly what that salt brine is every single time they go out. Because if someone makes it to 25% and they make a whole storage tank like that, you're gonna have problems. So it's very, very important to make sure it's at 23.3%.
Once you put it on the truck,
Yep.
you've gone out, you've done your storm.
Yep.
You've got a third of a tank left. You just leave it in until the next storm. What do you do with it?
Yep, so like what we do in Minnesota, for the most part, we're using the same blend every storm, and the guys will just, leave it loaded in there. Whatever's in there, they'll just leave it in there. The difference with liquids compared to like a V-Box, if it's gonna get cold, you wanna make sure you actually get that emptied out, so it doesn't freeze in there. So the other nice part, we used to do this when we had, our service area was bigger. We had a guy that would dispatch from his house. He pretty much just lived in the service area, so he would come, load up the 305 sprayer in the back of his 1-ton truck, he had a plow in the front, and he would just go to his house, dispatch from there. So sometimes he would load up at 10 a.m. on Wednesday for a snow event that was happening Thursday. So he'd load up, get his truck ready, go home, just relax, get some good sleep. You couldn't do that with a V-Box. Have it loaded up and just sit in your driveway for 24 hours, it's gonna freeze up. With liquids, doesn't matter. Just go out there, plow your lots, fire up your sprayer, you're gonna be able to spray out. So it's another nice benefit, especially if you've been out for 16 hours already. The last thing you wanna do is spend another 30 minutes cleaning out your V-Box. This way you can just park it and basically go home.
What is a gallon weight with 23.3%?
The gallon weight is it's like 10.5 pounds per gallon. I think it's 10.58 is
Or
what
about 2 pounds heavier?
Yeah, yep, exactly. So it's not exactly 2.28 pounds heavier just because of the way, basically that salt brine is dissolved. There's some more science behind it, but it's like 10.5.
So you figure out gross vehicle and
Yeah.
gross vehicle weight.
Yep, exactly. So that's important to know. And we actually have a chart too that if you're actually looking for, like I have an F550 size truck, you can figure out what that truck weighs, and then you can figure out, if we have a loaded weight with salt brine, it's like, okay, we can put a 750 on that truck. So, that's something we help people size up too. Now I know some people, I'm sure no one here is guilty of overloading a truck, but, so, yeah, it's something to, yeah, you've never done it, right? No, never, yeah. So, yeah.
What's your post-cleaning procedure for your equipment in your truck?
So, like after an event?
Correct.
Okay, so what we usually recommend is something, this does have a gas engine on it, so we always recommend keeping up with your oil changes and things like that. But, always rinsing this thing off, getting it clean, and then especially like the linkages around, the throttle and the choke and everything like that, the backside of the engine, where the starter is, always keep that lubricated with, something like fluid film.
Crown.
Yeah.
Crown or fluid film.
Yep,
That
exactly.
actually neutralizes salt. And
Yes.
will.
Yep, that's very important.
And
Yep.
you can get it in spray cans, 5-gallon pails and whatever. Power washing, salt equipment does not ever get rid of the salt. It's
Yep.
always there and it's always working.
Yep, so if you have a way to have a salt neutralizing cleaner, to clean that up, keep that engine is the most important thing to actually keep clean. Otherwise it starts corroding and then at some point, if you don't clean that thing, the Honda just kind of turns into a throwaway engine. You just have to get a new one, because there's really not much you can do to repair it once it's beyond. I mean, you've seen that before too.
Do you offer any electric versions?
So we have an electric version called our Genesis series, but that's not GPS rate control. That's just a single lane boom. It's just an on-off switch. That's like basic, bare bones, entry level. Even maybe for someone who has 2 parking lots that they need to do, 2 small lots, maybe just like a contractor who works by himself.
Any reason you're not using more electric?
A lot of it has to do right now with cost. To actually, I mean, we could have a fully electric 305 sprayer. Probably gonna cost $27,000. No one's gonna buy it. You know, we'll probably sell 3 or 4 a year if we were to do that. So the other thing is the power requirements that, you know, to run a 2-inch pump like that, to actually get you the flow rates, we don't wanna completely, you know, drain all the amperage, you know, that you can out of that truck. So we just wanna make sure that we do it right. Now, since we are connected with Boston Toro, we have a lot more resources on our side. Because with the Legacy series, since it is controlled with an app on your phone, we wanna stick with that. We don't wanna have a wired system into the truck again if we don't have to. So we're looking at some sort of different battery technology to make that work. You know, utilizing some of the things you've seen on, like the Toro grandstands that are out there. Again, cost makes it pretty prohibitive right now, but just like anything, when DVD players first came out, they were just stupid, crazy expensive. We just need to give it a little bit of time to get that cost down, so it's gonna be affordable for everyone to actually purchase. So it's something we are working on. So we've had a lot of demand for that because, you know, especially like with the Boss VBX spreaders, people like it because they are electric. Because a lot of people had, you know, gas engines on salt spreaders years ago, they didn't have the best experience with it. So we're definitely working towards it. There's just no perfect option yet. Yeah. Any other questions on liquid process or even equipment? Well, thanks for sitting through and thanks
Thanks, Adam.
Yeah, absolutely.
Anybody learn anything today? Anybody learn anything that already uses liquid today? So it's, you know, VSI has a lot of knowledge, and that's why we really are excited to partner with them. And Toro brings a lot to the game as far as money and stuff. I mean, all of our equipment that I've ordered is sitting in VSI because it had to go through Toro's safety control, and all of our equipment was held up for stickers because we didn't have pictures of stickers, we just had words. So now they got those, so hopefully next week they're releasing our equipment, and we'll have equipment here, 305s, 700s.
750s, Brine Buddies, Legacy Brine Makers.
Yeah, Legacy brine makers and the small brine makers. So our brine makers can make 300 gallons an hour, or if you buy the bigger Legacy brine maker, 3,000 to 5,000 gallons an hour, depending on how you can get water to it. The issue is getting enough water to it, is what Adam and them tell me is, you know, you can't do it with a garden hose. You're gonna have to have a bigger hose and a supplemental tank to work it. So if you guys decide you wanna do your own brine making, your brine makers, you know, Adam's more than happy to help design it. I'm learning as fast as I can, and I got pricing on storage tanks if you want 5,000 gallon, 2,000 gallon totes, all that stuff. If you make brine, and you know, one of the things we're thinking is you're gonna be able to take a tank and put it out on site, because the Legacy will suck right out of it, and you can put a tank, whatever gallon you need to cover that designated area, and put the additive next to it in a tote, because you're only using 5%, and suck them right into the 305s or the bigger units. We also are going to partner with somebody local, Swinter. They have 5 locations. So if you want to get into this and don't want to invest in a brine maker and making your own brine and doing all that stuff, they have 5 locations and they're gonna have brine and additive. They didn't use additive before, but for the most part, but we're gonna have them stock additive, or I'll pay for the additive, and you know, we can sell it through them. But there's 5 locations throughout St. Louis area, which are close, and I think it's a good option for some guys just starting. I don't really wanna get into the brine making business if I can help it, at this point. So I looked at it, and, you know, but I just, for us being a contractor, I just don't, selling equipment, and I don't wanna be in the brine making business where they do it and they're open 24 hours, and, you know, you can make your own brine and that. So everybody that signed up, I hope you left your email, because when there's done, we'll correlate that, and the 17-page fact sheet that they have, everyone will get that email to them.
Did everybody get a chance to get this book?
If you didn't sign up and give me, that's the only reason I'm collecting them, so I can send you this stuff. You also, will videotape this whole thing, hopefully it all turned out all right, and it'll be available on our YouTube, video, so you can revisit it or share it with somebody else or somebody in your company and wanna learn. I have prices on, I've been working with a guy out of Texas and got pricing on tanks and stuff like that, so if you need help with that, contact me or Todd or somebody, and we'll get you that information. This is one of, where actually, you know, we used to do 4 or 5 training events every year. This is the first one for this year. We'll start in probably January, doing one every month or so, and we'll be able to get back. Wayne Goals from Profits Unlimited is here, and he does training on how to make money on snow and maintenance, and he's spoken at my events numerous times, and he'll be back at one of those events talking about mowing, and then we'll do one on snow as well. On how to, you know, it's all about making money. We want you all guys to make money, and doing this stuff and handling VSI, I think, is a very big opportunity for yous and us, because I think it's the future. Just like someday electric mowers are gonna be the future. Not today, but, you know, some people are using them now already, but it's gonna be the future. And this is like the future. And so I don't think, from our area, from what I understand with Adamant, you know, granular is not gonna completely go away, but I don't think.
Probably not 100%, but
a lot of it.
Working towards that, yeah.
You know, so remember the additives and the ratios, and we'll get you all that information. We're gonna take a break. There's 2 bathrooms out here. We have one lady, so let her go first, and then you guys can use both of the bathrooms, and then we have 2 bathrooms downstairs, so go to the restroom, whatever, and we're gonna get set up, we're gonna have lunch.
One last thing, so like I said, Scott collected the emails, get you that liquid implementation guide, you get tons of information there, 17 pages, there's a lot to look over there. But once you get through that, you know, if you actually want to set up a call with me directly, just get in touch with Scott, and I'd be happy to talk you through. If you want to set up a brine making plant, we can go over what your shop looks like, you know, the power requirements, things like that. But yeah, I'll be happy to walk you through that, and then once you decide, okay, I need this brine maker, I want these sprayers, then you go right back to Scott and place your order. So we're just kind of here to walk you through this liquid process and get you going in the right direction. Because like I said, we had a lot of trial and error ourselves, and boy, if I can just tell someone, you know, do this and it's gonna work, and if they say, well, I thought about trying this, if I can give them an example as to why it kind of blew up in our face, and they avoid that, you know, pain and suffering like we did, that's worth it to me.
So, and as far as equipment goes, I've ordered equipment, but with everything else, VSI has a finite number of equipment that we can get, and if you decide you want to get into the game, probably should talk sooner than later. Just like lawnmowers, we're already taking orders for lawnmowers for next spring, because we don't know when we're gonna get them. So, thanks for coming. It was a great crowd that showed up. Hope you learned something. And we'll have lunch here in a minute, and then we're gonna go outside after lunch. Hope you can stick around, and we're gonna actually show the 305 in action, and we have a Snow Raider mag, which is the new, bigger Snow Raider that can handle a broom, and a V-blade, and a snow blower, which we won't use in St. Louis, I don't think ever, but.
Minnesota? Yeah, we definitely.
Yeah, but, yeah, and then we have a Snow Raider here, and that as well, so, anyway, stick around, go to the bathroom and that, we'll get the food set up, and, have something to eat, and then we'll go outside. Thanks for coming, appreciate it.